Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rachel Kite. I'm the Secretary-General's Special Representative for Sustainable Energy for All. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this session on Sustainable Development Goal 7, Leave No One Behind. The Deputy Secretary-General, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, is on her way, and I'm going to get going and we'll slot her in as she arrives, just because there are so many member states here and other partners with very much to say. So, Leave No One Behind was the commitment that we all made when we agreed the Sustainable Development Goals in September 2015. It was also part of the cement in the Paris Agreement, the remarkable global deal that was reached just 3 months later. We picked up this theme in the Sustainable Energy for All Forum in May in Lisbon, where we invited those who are at the front line of delivering on Sustainable Development Goal 7, the ministers, the civil servants, the entrepreneurs, the women's business leaders, NGOs, financiers, large and small, to come together to talk about what was working and what wasn't, and why. More than 900 people from all of those sectors came together and really focused in the conversation on what it would take to go to speed and scale. There are so many examples of what is beginning to work that we should celebrate that, but the speed and scale is still for the moment elusive. The tracking report, which we've all, I'm sure, seen and has been talked much about last week, but which was launched in Lisbon, really showed where the progress is and where we need to be concerned. So the share of renewable energy in final energy consumption has grown modestly, up to about 18.3% between 2012 and 2014. That pace of growth is nowhere near where we need to be in order to achieve the goal in 2030. We also heard that the rate of electrification is going up, and that those with access to electricity in 2014 are more than in 2012. But we have 600 million or more sub-Saharan Africans who still do not have access to electricity, most of those living in rural areas. Much has been made of the fact that we have more people today without access to clean fuels for cooking and the technology for that cooking than we did when we agreed the goals in 2015, despite remarkable progress by certain countries. What unites all of these stories is that where government sets aggressive targets, where government then galvanizes government behind them, where the private sector is able to trust in an investment climate and make long-term investment, and where civil society can bring its innovation together with the private sector and together with government, it is possible to pick up the pace. And we can point to countries who are really making quite remarkable progress. One of the other areas that came out that was highlighted in the Lisbon Congress was the issue of cooling, and this morning we launched the Cooling for All report on what it would take to get everybody access to sustainable cooling. Too often ignored, thinking thermally about our economy now seems to be at the center of what it's going to take to reach Sustainable Development Goal 7, achieve the Paris Agreement, and achieve the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol. I think the stories of success are very pertinent. Access to decentralized renewable energy can result in significant cuts in carbon emissions, but more importantly, it can transform the lives of those in the households that are affected. We've seen remarkable progress in countries from Bangladesh to Ethiopia to Kenya. And the question is, what are they doing and how are they doing it? And how can others replicate that? What are the pieces of what they are doing that are replicable? And how can we, as an international community, back them to continue to succeed and find ways for those lessons to be spread across other countries? Somewhere, somebody is doing something quite remarkable, and lifting those examples up and learning from them and then replicating them seems to us to be one of the smarter strategies to get back on speed and scale for achievement of SDG7 by 2030. I think the other message that came through from the forum loud and clear is that the energy transition means thinking about energy services in a very comprehensive way. Energy as services are what you need to get access to the healthcare you demand for your children. Energy services are what you need so that your child will learn when she or he is in school. Energy services are what you need in order to be able to increase yield as a rural farmer. And so the intersection between the SDGs is perhaps one of the most creative and the most open for innovation spaces that we can see. So there is a clear case for optimism. The sustainable energy movement is growing more and more diverse, with people coming from all kinds of sectors of industry, coming from every walk of life, coming from across civil society, and coming from different departments of government as well. There are many reasons to be hopeful that due to the passionate involvement of political leaders, business and communities, we can actually start picking up the pace. Access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy services is essential for delivering on the wide range of benefits that would come as a result. It can build the resilience of economies to future change. It can support livelihoods and productive growth and drive economic expansion. In short, access to sustainable energy for all, leaving no one behind, is essential for all of the SDGs. The panelists who are here today will speak about what's working and how success can transform lives. We will examine why policy matters, how partnerships work, and how to stimulate financial flows. I'm hoping we will also hear stories about what is needed to deliver at speed and scale, and what's missing currently in efforts to manage the energy transitions so that we are at that speed and scale. We also hope that what we hear today can serve as an inspiration for concepts that can also be discussed in the run-up to the UN Secretary-General's Climate Change Summit in September 2019, where energy is going to be one of the themes of focus. So, with those introductory remarks, when the Deputy Secretary-General arrives, we'll give her the floor, but maybe I could ask to my colleagues on the ministerial panel to get the ball rolling, and then as the DSG comes in, we'll let you complete your comments and then hand over to her. So it is my distinct honour and pleasure to introduce the Prime Minister of Togo, Prime Minister Komi Salam Klasu, and ask him to talk about the kinds of things that they are doing. As many of you know, Togo has made ambitious goals and has started to see some very ambitious financing coming into the country to realise those goals. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
You know, as they say in the business, perfect timing. Are you ready to go?
Do you have the floor?
Do you want to? Yeah. I think if you're ready.
Non, non. Je peux?
Oh,
Okay.
bon, alors.
Merci.
I'd like to thank the SRSG and also welcome the Deputy Secretary General and all of the experts present here.
Remercier.
I would also like to thank ECOSOC for having invited Togo to participate for the third time in this high-level political discussion so that we could share with the international community the experiences we've had in Togo and, in turn, draw on experiences elsewhere. For this afternoon's panel, which is specifically devoted to SDG7, namely providing energy to our entire population, clean energy, accessible, affordable energy. It is possible. Togo recognized, as we said yesterday, we said yesterday, water is life, but today energy is the foundation for economic growth. And if we don't place significant importance on energy, then we cannot boost the economy and encourage development in order to combat poverty effectively. We will not achieve that goal. And that is why the energy sector in Togo has always been of particular importance. I must say that we face a number of challenges in this sector in our country, but the President of the Togolese Republic is determined to meet this challenge, and as heads of state, we turn those wishes into action. To date, in accordance with the 17 SDGs, Togo has made its choice, recognizing its own priorities, our priorities. Of these 17 SDGs, we have worked together with others from the ground up, that is, from the prefectures, then at the regional level and the national level, to identify the real needs of our people. And through that work, we've been able to recognize and then prioritize our needs. Out of the 17 SDGs, there are 3 key goals which underpin the themes of the 17 goals.
De faire du Togo d'ici 2030
So by 2030, we will become a logistic hub of excellence and a business center in the West African region. That's the first axis. The second is to promote agricultural manufacturing and mining industry, and to consolidate social development and bolster mechanisms for inclusion. So this means that no one should be left behind. Turning specifically to the energy sector, our country has made progress in the sense that the rate of electrification in our country in 2005 was only 18%. 18%. The rate of electrification in 2005 was 18%. But in 10 years, we have doubled that rate. And in 2016, it reached 36%. Currently, in 2018, we are at 38%. So what does the future hold? How, by 2030, will we be able to provide universal access for all the people of Togo? The President of the Republic, who, as I said, it is under his leadership that we are working, and he has made it possible for us to focus on renewable energy sources. So our projections are that in order to achieve universal access to energy by 2030, we need to focus on renewable energy sources. And that is why the President went himself to the first summit on renewable energy in March in India. So Togo has established a plan with set objectives, which are clearly outlined. And this project was launched on the 27th of June. It was followed by a roundtable of investors and development partners. We are determined to increase the rate of electrification, which is now at 38%, to 50% by 2020. And from 2021 to 2025, we wish to bring the rate of electrification to 75%. And then ultimately, the goal is to achieve 100% by 2030. So from 2026 to 2030, we hope to achieve the rate of 100%. This is the new strategy which we have set in place. But we have three different sources. Firstly, we have the conventional network, hydroelectric power. From the classical grid, we wish to reach a number of sites that do not yet have an energy source. The second source, as we said earlier, would be to focus on renewable energy. And we are focusing on small power stations. And then we have solar kits. I misspoke. I said school kids instead of solar kids. I used to be in the Ministry of Education, but we have these solar kits for household use. So that is how we are structuring our new electrification strategy in Togo to reach our objectives by 2030. Today, we have a rate of electrification, as I said, of 38%, and by 2020, that rate should reach 50%. It is feasible because there is another initiative which is running in tandem with the current project. It's called CISO, one of our local languages, not scissors. It means lightened, lit up. And that project, it has been running now for 6 months, and it has provided access to electricity to 2,500 households, 16,000 Togolese in 6 months. So in 6 months, if we've been able to provide access to electricity to more than 2,500 households, you can well imagine that our electrification strategy by 2030, which has been structured in 3 phases, as I've just mentioned, that goal is feasible. But we need about 1 billion CFA francs in order to achieve this goal. We need to mobilize that kind of funding. Therefore, when we launched the new strategy, we held a roundtable for donors. That followed the 27th and the 28th of June last, because we cannot provide for all of that investment ourselves, and some partners have already come forward. The African Development Bank is one of those partners which has stepped forward. It has pledged $30 million to assist us in our efforts, and we hope that the private sector and other major groups will be able to support us in this initiative, in particular since we are focusing on renewable energy while respecting the environment at a reduced rate for our people. Now, perhaps if there are questions, I will be able to refer to some other concerns which I may not have covered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for a very clear explanation of what happens when you set targets and goals and then can mobilise the kinds of different kinds of finance behind those. I'm going to ask now the Deputy Secretary General to address this meeting. She needs no introduction. I just want to say on a personal note that I was lucky enough to travel with her for a couple of days last week, and also with my colleague Pumzile from UN Women. And you all know the power of the Deputy Secretary General, but I have to say that she has a transformative effect on her own. To see the way in which she is able to get people to focus in her interactions with them in the field is a powerful display of why it matters that we have somebody like her in the position that she's in. It was my distinct privilege to be with you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I want to be like you when I grow up. Thank you so much, Excellencies, Prime Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and many friends in the room. Really pleased to be with you to discuss the important topic of moving ahead with SDG7. And my sincere apologies for running a bit late. They haven't yet got round to cloning us at that level, so we are trying to catch up. We all know that we were part of the 2030 agenda that declared eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions as probably the greatest challenge that we've got globally. And access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy is really critical to meet that objective. It's also essential for addressing climate change, which is indispensable, we know, for sustainable development. Put simply, sustainable energy is our golden thread that links most of the SDGs and the pledge that is to leave no one behind. Access to cleaner energy benefits people's health, especially our women and girls, by reducing risks from indoor and outdoor pollution and by enabling access to clean water and refrigeration. And modern energy services for all means improved medical facilities, especially in rural areas, enabling the safe storage of medicines and vaccines. Access to modern energy services can also enhance the quality of education. Globally, today, we have over 291 million children that attend primary schools without any electricity. And this means that they have no electric light, no refrigerators, no fans, no computers, no printers, sitting in very, very hot temperatures as climate change becomes more intense across regions. Of course, this energy must be sustainable, and so therefore, accelerating progress on SDG 7 means accelerating renewable energy and energy efficiency to combat climate change. 2/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the energy sector. All of these interlinkages show how important the goal is for the achievement of all the SDGs, and in particular, our Paris commitments. However, today we're not moving fast enough. As seen in the latest SDG progress report, we're making gains in energy efficiency, but not at the pace needed to double energy productivity by 2030. On renewable energy, we're seeing rapid progress in the power sector, but far less in transportation and industry and heating. Energy access is a similar story. Globally, some 1 billion people still lack access to electricity. The numbers on access to clean cooking are even more sobering. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, 860 million people lack access to clean cooking fuels and technologies. There are 207, that for us is 275 million more people than we had in 2010. So the consequences, we know, are absolutely devastating. According to the new data from the World Health Organization, some 4 million people die every year because of indoor air pollution. And it bears repeating that the hardest hit are women and girls in rural areas living without modern energy services. In poor households, women and girls are largely responsible for the collection of fuel for cooking and heating and for manually processing grains and other foods. Fuel collection can take as much as up to 6 hours each day. And I can tell you, in one of the countries we visited just recently, collecting fuel for cooking also had a gender-based violence lens on it too. A number of our girls and women that are raped on their way to getting fuel. So we know that women and girls are disproportionately affected by long-term health problems caused by household air pollution and carrying heavy fuel loads. As Rachel had just said, I've returned together with Pumzili from UN Women from leading a joint mission of the UN African Union, together with the minister in Sweden, to South Sudan, Niger, and Chad, where these impacts were clear. In South Sudan, women in protection of civilian sites were at a greater risk of being attacked when they traveled outside their camps, increasingly for longer distances, access to water or wood. In Chad and Niger, lack of access to electricity is stark. In Niger, only 5% of the rural population had access, and less than 2% of the population has the possibility of clean cooking solutions. We saw the impacts of these numbers when visiting with women in Bol in Chad and in Maradi in Niger, who were taking up new roles, whether as fisherwomen or farmers, to feed their families, but where electricity could mean more hours available for income-generating activities, better health services, and study time for their children's advancement. Increased access to clean, affordable, and modern energy is a key to changing these statistics. It can reduce unpaid domestic work and enable women's economic empowerment. And the means are there, sadly, the means are there. And we heard from our Special Representative on Energy for All, who joined the mission, how 70% of the world's electricity needs could be provided by solar power in the Sahel alone. So, ladies and gentlemen, the challenges we know are daunting, but there are many reasons for optimism as much as we face these huge challenges. Many countries are making progress across all measures of access, efficiency, and renewable energy. The question is not what to do, but what are Kenya or Bangladesh or Chile doing that we can learn and we can replicate, take to scale. Let us look at the lessons that can be learned. The most successful countries today have got robust policy frameworks with investment climates that attract both domestic and international investment. They set clear targets for themselves, and these are championed from the very top of government, as we just heard now from the Prime Minister and Togo. Many of those progress leads the way to shift to more integrated planning. They're addressing the SDGs as well as their energy and climate needs through their NDCs under the Paris Agreement. However, too few countries are focused on the vast improvement in energy efficiency that is both needed and is possible. It's not just a priority for the industrialized world, but all countries whose cities of the future are not yet built. For SDG7 and the Paris Agreement to be achieved, we need to intensify all our efforts. Moving forward, we have a number of opportunities and solutions. The first in-depth review of SDG7 at this year's high-level political forum provides a critical occasion for taking stock and for catalyzing ambitious action. The VNRs, our voluntary national reviews for 2030 agenda, provide really good insights. NDCs can harness clean energy solutions that drive progress towards the Paris Agreement. And in September next year, the SG will convene a climate change summit in New York to galvanize climate action and enhance ambition. Affordable and clean energy will play a key role. And here at the UN, we continue to strengthen our efforts to support member states in support of the agenda and the Paris Agreement. And Sustainable Energy for All will continue to provide a critical platform for all stakeholders to come together, engage, learn, and more importantly, to act on the solutions that are available. So we believe that SDG7 is within reach, but only if we all take immediate actions at scale. And this requires for us to come into solid and robust partnerships. And what we hope today is that you will pave the way for more leadership and more innovative action, for we have no time to lose. I wish you all a productive meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the gauntlet has been thrown down yet again, and we have but to respond to it. And so it's appropriate then to switch the microphone to Sweden. Sweden is one of those countries that doesn't say, do as we say, but do as we do, and has been a fundamental supporter of the work on sustainable energy, but also the intersection between sustainable energy and gender and health and other areas. So it's with great pleasure I pass the floor to the Environment Minister, Carolina Skog.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Deputy Secretary General, for your remarks. And I know my colleague, Minister of Foreign Affairs, fully enjoyed the travel you made together. It was very, I know it's put the spotlight to some very, very important issues regarding energy and equality. Let me first say that sustainable energy for all has a very important role to play in the follow-up on SDG7. And one of the unique features is that it gathers so many different stakeholders. As a global platform, Sustainable Energy for All is an important part of Sweden's work on SDG7 at the global level. As had been pointed out, a transformation of the global energy system forms the backbone of climate action as well of sustainable development and poverty reduction. Sweden is fully committed to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, both of which heavily depend on energy transition. And these two processes are mutually reinforcing and two sides of the same coin. Sweden particularly sees the need for supporting the development of energy system based on a combination of renewable energy sources, decentralized and small-scale solutions, increased grid distribution capacity, and energy efficiency measures. These all are parts that need to be in place. A key aspect in this regard is to ensure equal access to energy between men and women, and to promote women's participations and leadership in the energy sector. As pointed out by the Deputy Secretary General, indoor pollution hits girl and women harshly. It's a killer, and it must be addressed promptly. We must also focus on increasing the share of renewable energy and improving energy efficiency in the emerging economies through assisting the development of enabling policy for energy transitions. And as mentioned by the moderator, we try to not only talk but also walk the talk in Sweden. And we have set the goal to be the first fossil-free welfare state in the world, claiming that there is no contradiction between a strong economy and the transition to a fossil-free economy. The contrary, we are sure that this will be beneficial for our economic development. So this means that we're aiming for an energy system based on 100% renewable energy. And this points out one of my main points, that political goals must be coherent and very, very clear. And this makes it possible to get to my second point, that to reach this, I believe that the key opportunities for progress are to be found in the combination of public funding and innovative business-driven investments. But to get this, we must set a political framework and a very clear road ahead, so businesses know where it is feasible to put their investment. And secondly, we must stop investment in what is to be left behind, which is the fossil energy, and stop subsidies towards fossil energy, which is a difficult political task. I would say for a country like us, it would be the most difficult part to actually get, but it's important to highlight and to have the ambition to actually do that. And a third factor for success is, of course, the empowerment of women and their possibility to both benefit from and be actors in the energy transition. And I would like to mention one among several initiatives in this regards, funded by Sweden, is Energia. It's an international network on gender and sustainable energy. For more than 20 years, Energia has been one of the main gender and sustain advocates for the importance of gender analysis and mainstreaming in the energy sector, and has now been recognized as a leader and a powerful voice in putting gender and energy on the international fora and in front of national level policy, supporting organizations with its networks to advance towards a more gender-inclusive energy sector. And we have some win-win-win possibilities if we can take investments out of fossil and into renewable, to decentralize and to empower women, and then we can both have reduce poverty, gain sustainable development, as well as reaching what we agreed to under the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think one of the things that's really interesting when you look at the tracking report is that you can see huge variation within groups of countries. So within the developed world, you've got countries who are performing at sort of one level, and then you've got countries who are developed, yet are performing quite significantly below others. And so, I think setting reasonable benchmarks so that within the EU, everybody's, at a level of excellence. Within the OECD, everybody's at a level of excellence. That this is a way to sort of break down what is, big global numbers into sort of, well, what's the Monday morning challenge for policymakers? What do parliaments need to be doing? How do people hold parliaments to account? And where does private sector need to be focusing its innovation efforts? So with a similar laser focus on results, it's now my pleasure to pass the microphone to another strong woman in the energy business. Minister Gail Rigobert needs no introduction to many of you who've been in some of the Sustainable Energy for All events. But from the Caribbean, from St. Lucia, she speaks truth to power. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel. That's so very kind of you. Distinguished panelists, excellencies, friends, good afternoon. For us in St. Lucia, a small island state in the Caribbean, SDG7, ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, is an imperative. It is no longer the preserve of the pedantic scientists, ideological politicians, or eccentric. Why did you laugh? So it's no longer the preserve of pedantic or eccentric scientists or environmentalists or ideological politicians. It undergirds any consideration of profit-making or good governance at this current juncture. We need to make the necessary systemic adjustments, therefore, to address incongruencies and inequalities in the political economy of energy. Commercialization and monetization of plausible alternatives to fuel become the selling point because moral suasion can only take us so far. At this juncture, we can begin to see some very compelling stories of success that resonate across various sectors. But still, there are laggards, there are skeptics, and there are some who are yet to be converted. And I ask the question, therefore, how many of us who have now arrived at the new truth of the necessity of SDG7 are willing to do the necessary evangelization? The necessary evangelization because small as we are, we should not be forgotten, neglected, or ignored, because we are the ones who stand on the front line of the effects of climate change. Some of the challenges confronted by small island states include speculators who come every week with suggestions of panaceas to our problems. And when we dig deep, we realize that it is but experimental technology. that they are not willing to address the challenges of economies of scale, and that for them, perhaps, it is a purely technical undertaking, while real lives are at stake. But there is hope. There is hope because there are people like us in this room who understand the new imperative, who understand the need for partnerships to correct the inequities and inequalities in the system, to ensure that indeed no one is left behind, no country, no population, no gender, no economic class, no ethnic group. And the transformation, therefore, can only happen when we devote our time to the stories of rural women farmers like the ones in St. Lucia who, according to Rex Nettleford, do not deliberately harm the environment, but they do so inadvertently as they seek to eke out a living. And that is why the intersection of the various SDGs is so important and is precisely where the hope resides. Because when you marry the need for sustainable livelihoods with the other pursuits, then you realize collectively there is hope. Are we in this room, therefore, committed to ensuring that no one, no ethnicity, no nation, no country, no economic class is left behind? Last week, I spent much of my time at the World Bank, and among the propositions I made was the solarization of schools. And why the solarization of schools? When I visit my primary school, the classrooms where I sat in the 1970s now require at least a ceiling fan and thick drapes to shade the sun. So solarization becomes important for 4 reasons. 1, it is in consonance with our own objective to phase out our dependence on fossil fuels. 2, to provide some level of comfort to our children by way of cooling. 3, naturally, to power up the school. And 4thly, curiously, because in our part of the world, schools also serve as emergency shelters, then you're building climate resilience. So in the event of an adverse weather system, when climate refugees leave their homes where power lines have gone down, then when they go into the school, at least there is some hope of a powered facility. I am convinced that if we marry our efforts together, we can correct some of these inequalities, incongruencies, and inequities. I therefore posit that when we say that we are committed to ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, solar, wind, and geothermal are some options. But until such time as the private sector is equally convinced that there is real value to be had in this endeavor, then much of what we'll say will remain but rhetoric, but some kind of abstract telling of stories that many of us, frankly, are very disconnected from. Not me. I'm very mindful that as of June 1st, I entered another hurricane season while my sisters in Dominica are still living under tarpaulin tents, and still some of the schools have not been able to regain a sense of normalcy. So I know of what I speak. And it is my job, therefore, to be here at this table to ensure that all of us in this room and everyone listening and viewing can be equally convinced that we must do something and do it now. Thank you.
I think the only appropriate response to that is amen. Yeah, and so I know that you have to leave, Mum, so well, Godspeed, and we'll keep on doing the work. Well, I'll brief you at the end, okay? Thank you very much. So it's not fair to Achim to have him follow you, really. I think we have to take pity on the administrator of UNDP. But you said that you spoke, you knew of what you speak. So that we have two panelists. We have a wonderful panel now. My dear friend and colleague Achim Steiner, the administrator of UNDP, my dear friend and colleague Pumzile Lambo-Nuka from the executive director of UN Women, Ajaita Shah, who is a great leader of women and of the private sector from India, and Bjarni Bjarnason, who's the CEO of Reykjavik Energy. And so maybe I should come to you, Ajita, and why don't you speak of what you know as well? Thank you.
I don't know how this works, so.
There you go. Oh, you had it.
There we go. Okay, great. Wow, my heart's still pounding after listening to you because it's literally everything that I feel. Thank you so much, distinguished guests, panelists, ministers, and everyone for giving me this opportunity as a social entrepreneur to come and talk about frontier markets and what we do in India. Frontier Markets has built a model to increase access to clean energy solutions for rural households at scale by putting women at the center of the value chain. Our 1,000 women entrepreneurs, or Solar Sahelis, use their own experiences and challenges due to the lack of reliable electricity to relate to households and bring solutions to the forefront through marketing, sales, after-sale service, and finance. Training these women and giving them an opportunity to earn income has been the biggest success factor. Women understand the need for energy because, as we've heard already, they deal with this reality in every way more than anyone else. In India, 270 million people do not have access to 24/7 power, and women are at the center of this value chain. Solar Sahelis have helped 400,000 households access clean energy solutions and earned over $2 million of income in the last 3 years, which they then use to invest into their families and into their communities, impacting over 2.1 million people. It's the deepest impact we look to strive to achieve. Money, helping other people earn money, using money to then invest in other people to earn money, and then money rotating on a regular basis. It's music. However, there is an evolution, and this evolution requires further intervention. Households are asking for much more than lighting now. They want power, they want appliances, they want quick service, and they want access to finance to make it happen. So in order to do this, we need to also then further invest in our women. Give them access to digital and technical training. Give them access to working capital. Build their skills to manage other entrepreneurs to drive sustainable impact across the value chain. To succeed, we need to change our mindset and understand the investment better. Banks have capital and intent, but they're not structured to provide low-interest loans to women without collaterals or credit history. Investment vehicles have capital, but they aren't ready to take the risk of investing in women. They might face larger challenges or maybe longer time to help households truly adopt to electricity sustainably. Our experience proves that she's the right investment. We have conducted several pilots with key partnerships with philanthropic organizations, nonprofits, corporate partners, testing the outcomes of blended capital, access to mobile phones and internet, and investing in training. It works. Our entrepreneurs are now leading managers and creating new Sahelis. They're collecting data through mobile phones, which includes what everybody wants right now for their reporting: needs assessments, village information, monitoring activities, real-time outcomes based on interventions. And they've also been able to use their working capital to increase their outreach and conversion by 33%. One woman times 33% of scale, it's massive. We recently announced an exciting initiative called Women Prosper, which is in partnership with Barefoot College to tackle this in a more systemic way. a disruption of the status quo, where for-profit and not-for-profit compete and splinter resources, driving two very different approaches, neither one holistically formed to ensure a long-term solution, and lack of energy access and inclusion of women for development. Women Prosper, which is the Frontier Markets Barefoot College baby, was a deconstructed solution that brought partners together to co-design and design around the barriers that stop women from fully participating in their own economic prosperity. It is grounded in a sound investment that in every woman will be able to get a return of 20x in the first 5 years. But not only through sales of renewable energy products, but in building customer networks, data, and linkages that will place her and us in a position to reach millions with life-changing solutions. Through partnerships with government, nonprofits, corporates, investors, and development agencies, Women Prosper will build a network of 10,000 women impacting 30 million people by 2022. The solution for success is accessing a full financial spectrum, from philanthropy to pure capital, investment around all the products in between. To align this, though, we need the right kind of funding to put a puzzle together that makes sense for every participant. To develop key performance indicators that properly align with the type of funding that we're receiving so the stakeholder knows what is being delivered and also what they're learning. Look, the old paradigm isn't working. There's too much duplication, there's too much splintering of resources, and all that are not helping us scale quickly or efficiently without comprehensive impact. It's time to set the bar higher, to demand social behavior change needed to drive increased energy consumption for whole communities upward the energy spectrum, beyond time, for every household to be powered by clean energy sustainably. We're calling on partners to bring consumer credit for the unbanked, work with us on smart subsidies. Let's use fintech, right? Let's use state-of-the-art data collection for a new model that will deliver over 70% of the rural market in India. In this partnership, India is our first area of investment. That is where we've all been kind of working for the last many years. But it's there to build model for replication. Barefoot College has presence in over 96 countries. And through the People-Centered Accelerator initiative that was started by the Sustainable Energy for All, we will be able to collaborate with other organizations that are keen to replicate this model in their countries, focused on, of course, Asia and Africa. Join our movement to prove that investing in women is smart business, the key to poverty alleviation at scale, and truly leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Okay, there you have it. So, Akim, what's UNDP going to do?
Well, after these presentations, I'm not sure what I should add, but I think first of all to say, in the Caribbean, listening to you, I mean, I think we are all extremely frustrated at the pace with which we have been able to build back better. I mean, remember that was, in some respects, the objective that under the leadership of nations in the Caribbean that we set out after yet another hurricane season with all its impacts to look for it. Clearly, 10 months is not enough time. So I think there are encouraging examples, and yet we still have a long way to go to even get back to where we were before. So I think even more of a reason for the Caribbean voice to be heard precisely on SDG7, because it is the energy policies and footprint of others who in part are causing what is causing there. Now, I begin with that because in focusing on SDG7, I think one thing that UNDP can and aspires to bring to this is, in a sense, the very DNA of the SDGs, which is meant to connect SDG7 to other outcomes or enabling conditions. And I think that is certainly something that our strategic plan has committed the organization to lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, our focus over the next 10, 11 years is SDGs, helping countries to realize the benefits of actually working in an SDG context. Now, take that down for a moment to SDG 7. And listening to you just now talking about the frontier, as you called it, I think the extraordinary thing that, first of all, we have, I think, as a family under SEforALL in the UN, but also UNDP, been part of is to shift that frontier almost weekly, which is something that we need to convey and communicate more clearly, not just at the level of national advice and project interventions, but also to a world that still believes that it is stuck with fossil fuel solutions, not debating now, is it exclusively one or the other, but simply allowing the world to recognize how rapidly other forms of access to energy are becoming viable. Secondly, to also tackle the myth head on, and I think here sometimes an organization like UNDP can be very helpful, which is to go to the frontiers of the leaving no one behind notion in the SDGs. I mean, we are, and we should not kid ourselves, still trying to make it from a commercial investor, but also from a user perspective, feasible for the poorest to have access to clean energy. Sometimes that is simply that there is no grid. So one of the areas in which UNDP focuses is to go into the off-grid areas, trying to identify how renewables can be, from a business model, from a policy model, from a national energy market governance model, be encouraged to actually grow in those areas. And I think here we come very quickly to frontiers that sometimes have to do with it's never been tried before, therefore it just doesn't happen. It's not that there is somebody standing there with a sign saying, please go away with solar panels. It's just nobody's ever come to ask us. Nobody's ever even come and sat down with us and talked about electricity being part of our local lives. And I think, in the work that we do with UN Women also, very often the issue here is not just consumptive use of electricity. It's actually productive use of electricity. And that's when we start talking. And I think, again, if we take the SDG logic, it's fantastic to have light in your house. But it's actually, the least difficult one to provide because it's a few kilowatts that you need. The power of having access to electricity and to power in a remote off-grid area is that you suddenly can start small, medium-scale enterprises, industries, processing. So inserting the productive use of clean and affordable energy very much becomes part of the UNDP design approach to it. And I think it's critical because in the SDG logic, what we have to succeed with is that, a dollar invested in access to clean energy is not only something that is, good in terms of affordable and clean energy, SDG7. It addresses climate change, SDG13, decent work 8, industry, innovation, infrastructure, SDG9. I just wrote down a few that I just picked out. Good health and well-being, SDG3. $1 invested in actual renewable, clean, affordable energy produces multiple dollars in returns. Just to make that visible to a Minister of Finance is already a major piece of our work that we have to accomplish. And so in the way that we look at the scalability of access to clean, affordable energy is not only from the point of view of those who have been left behind, the off-grid areas, it's then also to move into the mainstream of development planning, development budgeting, governance, the establishment of markets for energy that allow for independent power producers, for independent investors to come together and go to scale. And therein lies, I think, one of the core contributions that UNDP can and is trying to make to a whole ecosystem of actors of whom you're all representatives of. Perhaps my most vivid memory of that change that can happen is one that I saw in Africa about 5-6 years ago. Africa was virtually nowhere on the clean energy highway that the world was beginning to jump on. And in less than 5-6 years, there is a dozen countries now. You probably have the numbers at your fingertips, Rachel. I being in New York now, I'm so far away from my beloved Africa, I don't have the numbers in the latest configuration. But, you suddenly see countries, Kingdom of Morocco, Kenya already one of the pioneers, South Africa, Mozambique, Ethiopia. We can go basically around the continent taking off on this. And, I envy this. We have in less than a decade turned a maxim on its head that renewable energy as an access tool for the poor is simply too expensive, to renewable energy being a shortcut to access to electricity. And it took less than a decade. And I think this is the power of good governance, good policy making, scaling up investment opportunities, getting the private sector to lead on the actual aggregation of finance, because it is they who are best at making economies of scale work. but it is in the conditions, regulatory and otherwise, that we set the conditions for that, and that's our core business in UNDP, and our role also within the SDG and 2030 agenda implementation. Thank you.
Well said, and it's for those of you who don't know, I'm honoured to be able to co-chair UN Energy together with Achim, with the support of UNDESA as the Secretariat, and the purpose of that will really be over the next period to sort of galvanise the UN system following the reform, so that we're able to really bring the best of the UN in service of member states to try and spur more of this action that we're starting to see, as Achim and others have noticed, from a number of countries, including those across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean and Pacific. So with that, I want to go to our other counterpart, to the Executive Director of UN Women, Pumzile Mlambo-Nuka. We had a little jaunt across Africa last week and saw a lot of the potential there if we can bring sustainable energy into the transformation of women's lives and then the transformation of communities. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It was indeed a privilege to be with you and DSG last week, and when we were sitting in convoys, we thought we were solving the problems of the world during the trip. So we also were exposed firsthand in both Chad and Niger to the enormous impact of the nexus between climate, extremism, and gender inequality, where because of the burden of managing energy needs in a household that girls and women face, when things fail, joining a terrorist movement becomes a career option, because it takes away the need for you to fend for the energy of your family. You have an income and some protection in quotes. It's a frightening possibility that we face, not unless we address these inadequacies in infrastructure that are changing truly the choices that communities and families will make for them. In communities where, as you know, where there is inadequate energy or water services, it is the women and girls who have to go and find these resources at great risk to themselves. The president of Niger told us that the best gift you can ever give a girl in Niger when she's getting married is a camel and a bucket, because she'll spend most of her life looking for water. I mean, what kind of a life is that? And this is a region that has abundance of sun, so there is a solution to the problem that the region is facing. So before we truly change the core of what humanity is about, where we actually turn women into fenders for their life and sustenance by making these dangerous choices, where women would feel and parents would feel that and think that their children will be taken off well if they marry them to somebody that they think will look after them, so they are minus these problems of finding these basic services for their families. That's putting those parents in a real bad place. We spoke to a girl who is 20 years old. At 20, she was married off at 15 because the family felt she would be better off with this gentleman, or no, not just gentleman, with that person who turned out to be a Boko Haram extremist, donated her as a suicide bomber. She and two other girls had to carry a mission. The other two girls died. She lost her 2 legs While she was in hospital, she was raped. She has survived all of that. She's now in the care of UNFPA Healing, and she now speaks about the danger of extremism and how to recognize the signs of someone who you think is a friend who can get you into trouble and is trying to educate herself. Climate in the Lake Chad Basin has created these extreme conditions that could actually change the way people view themselves and how they want to bring up their communities. The fact that the highest number now of suicide bombers are girls and women. Terrorists are using gender equality as a formula to get more girls to be part of their machinery. So they'll outdo us who are fighting for gender equality and parity by bringing more girls to die. Really? And this has something to do with climate. So I'm just dramatizing this because this is not a light discussion. Of course, we've highlighted the issues around health that are critical, but also the good news is that we are able, through the capacity and the technology and the affordability that is there today, to provide off-grid energy that would be more cost-effective, will be cleaner, and would employ women and girls also as part of the people who are bringing and installing the energy to the community, maintaining it, and thriving from the benefits of energy, as the Barefoot College has shown what happens when you train women to become part of the value chain of energy. And of course, a big role for governments in addressing affordability and other role players, because it is really, truly frustrating that, for instance, a woman living in a village in northern Nigeria spends about 60 to 80% times more for her energy than a resident of New York. So energy becomes a luxury for the poorest of the poor and not something they can take for granted. There is also the challenge of ensuring that when we provide infrastructure in communities, when we do have budgets as governments, we don't always probably see the basic infrastructure as the critical infrastructure. Sometimes at the time when I was a minister of energy and had to be associated with a lot of infrastructure department, I would be frustrated to see an argument for an airport in some isolated places where a handful of tourists would land as against water and sanitation for a whole community. So these are some of the big choices that we have to make for ourselves and put women and girls and whole communities first. Women's exposure to harm when they are fetching water and energy, as we know, is legendary for the problems that it creates for women and girls. So I am grateful that in this HPLF, we are reviewing this goal and that there's so many of us who are saying the same thing. Thank you.
So I think one of the threads that's coming through this whole discussion and has been so illuminating, I think, in the last year as we've tracked the progress towards SDG7 in advance of this high-level political forum, is that if we adopt the traditional way of thinking, which is here's the electricity system or here's the energy system, and we're just going to build it out until it reaches everybody, we're never going to get there. And we now have reason to believe that that's an extremely expensive and slow way of trying to get there. But what we're seeing is that if you turn it around, and if you think about the transformation of people's lives and the empowerment that comes into a community with access to energy services because of the new technology, because of new financial models, that if we can reach those people who have traditionally been outside, then we can reach everybody in between. And, you know, within SEforALL, we've sort of taken a sort of brutal 80-20 approach to this, right? The 20 countries account for 80% of the energy access gap. 20 countries account for 84% of the clean fuels gap for cooking. Another 20 countries are the most energy-intensive countries in the world. I mean, if we don't, we have to work everywhere, but, you know, these are countries where there has to be a sort of international coming together around where are the lessons of best practice. You know, a number of those countries then concentrate into sub-Saharan Africa, and what we saw as we travelled last week is that you really do need to step back and think about the transformation of the rural economy in a world racked by climate change already. This is not a future state, it's right here, right now. And if we don't put women at the centre of that equation, we're simply not going to be able to lift everybody up. So lots of innovation, lots of ideas, frankly lots of money in the system as well, maybe not reaching where it needs to reach in the format that it's needed, at the time that it's needed, at the price that's needed, but that's a problem that we can surely put our heads around and come up with solutions. But these are universal goals, and we've talked about the role that women play in shaping what the definition of the problem and then in shaping the solution. And I want now to give the floor to a true he for she, although I'm not sure whether he ever got an award from you, Pumzali. But Bjarne Bjarnason is the CEO of Reykjavik Energy, and he's a living example of what happens when you walk your own talk. Maybe you could tell us the story and inspire us from your perspective.
Thank you, Rachel. This has been an incredible panel, inspiring and serious at the same time. So I wonder what I'm doing here, a middle-aged CEO from Western Europe with the grey hair and the growing belly. But I believe everyone can contribute, so I'll tell you shortly my story. Iceland is in the North Atlantic, between Norway and Greenland. For those of you who have not been there, it's a very cold country, so we need energy for heating, not for cooling. It's the size of Portugal, but we are not very many people, though. Reykjavik Energy is the main utility company and a power producer as well. We serve about 2/3 of Iceland, of the population, with cold water, geothermal district heating for heating houses. 90% of houses are heated by geothermal, sewage services, power production, distribution, and fiber optics. It is 109 years old, and for the first 100 years it was totally male-dominated. There was nothing else. After the crisis in Iceland, the bank crisis in 2008 and 2009, the company was very badly hit, and it was almost bankrupt. So the male dominance was obviously not working very well in our case. So I came into the company in 2011 to rescue the company, to make an attempt, because it was seriously hit. The owner's equity was down to about 10%. And we saw immediately that the crisis was an opportunity, and you should never let a good crisis go wasted. There are so many things you can do in a very short time. Everyone understands the urge, every employee, and to think differently, do new things, and if you don't succeed, it will cost you the job. So there's a momentum in this situation. Never forget that. So we decided not only to work on finances, because that's very boring. Because there are many other things we can do. We work very much on environment, health and safety, and we made 2 decisions in 2011. One was to balance gender across the management of the company, and the other one was to eliminate the gender pay gap. At that time, we had no idea if we could succeed, how fast it would go, and what lions we would, well, not in Iceland though, we would meet on the way. We had a success which was much faster and better than we could ever imagine. Last year, we obtained both goals. We went from 24% of women across the management team to 51%. And we're going to stop there because 51% is the same percentage as women among people on Earth. So that's a good reference. Secondly, we got the gender pay gap down from 8 to 10%, which was relatively low if you look at statistics from the world. And in December last year, we got down to minus 0.3%. So just think of the term minus. We are so fixed the idea that if there's a sort of unequal payment between the genders, it's always in favor of men. So we have to use minus when it becomes in favor of women. And but anyway, we are happy, and the company is a better company in every respect. When we grew from 24% in women across the entire management team, and now they're in all sorts of positions. They were in low positions before, from 24 to 51%. The owner's equity has gone from just about 10 up to 47%. So that's very clear. But don't forget that gender equality is human rights. You don't pay for it. You don't have to look at figures when you think about gender equality. That's very important. So we are happy. It shows us many things. It shows that even companies like, or sectors like the power sector, which is traditionally very male-dominated, can be changed, and very quickly, to the benefit of everyone. One of the things we've seen, apart from the finances, is that job satisfaction has gone up quite steeply, and the thing that we have never expected is that job satisfaction among men has grown more than for women. And of course, when we look back, mixed workplaces are better workplaces. It's very simple. So I would like to point out that CEOs, even if they are with a belly and gray hair, they can make important decisions because they have the power. That's so important, so important. And I think we should not stop there. We should look at the boards of directors for the companies. In my group of companies, we have 4 boards of directors. 2 of them have women in the majority of the seats, and 2 of them have the chairman as women. We should let the boards of directors ask them to put pressure on the CEOs. The CEOs, they are expected to deliver on budgets, on projects, and all different things, but that they are not measured against results in gender equality. You should do that. It's a part of human rights. And so this is my short story. Thank you.
So the latest figures that I have is that on the board composition of listed utilities, 16% of board seats are women. And if you look at the energy sector as a whole, if you look at listed equities, the average energy company's board composition is 6% women. So I think there's a couple of important morals from Bjarni's story, and we won't get into the football, is that first of all, it takes leadership, it takes a CEO, it takes a chairman of the board, right? Secondly, it can happen more quickly than perhaps many companies think. And that 3, I think the fact that the company is performing better by every measure is really important. So when we look at the universality of SDG7, and we look at this, and this is in particularly important for the, for developed countries who are reporting out this year, next year, etc. This is something that I think that maybe we want to be zeroing in on. But thank you, Bjarne, for bringing that story to us. So, we look at leaving no one behind. That's it's important in the private sector, but and if you permit me, Honourable Prime Minister, for all of the men and women of politics, and we have the feminist foreign policy of Sweden, we have the gender equity commitments of Iceland, but I think that we all know that around that cabinet table, more women will make a difference as well, and in parliaments, more women will make a difference, and in the political parties that feed parliaments, more women will make a difference. So if we're really serious about this 2030 deadline, seems like we've got some work to do. Now, it's very unfair of me to then call on a minister, but we're very pleased. There's a few people from the floor who signal that they'd like to just make some very short reflections and comments. And we've been joined by the Honourable Minister of Environment from Senegal, Mamiteno Deng, and apart from the fact that your team played some of the most beautiful soccer at the whole of the World Cup, and we won't get into refereeing decisions. I know, but really, yeah. we all ended up going home. But anyway, and you have to have some empathy for me, because I was actually with the Foreign Minister of Sweden when England was playing Sweden, and she was clearly distressed, and I had to just keep a very, very straight face for hours on end. But we all have our stories. Minister, would you like to say a few words? Would you like to talk about what it takes to get SDG7 done?
Je pourrais effectivement parler en anglais.
Well, I could speak in English, but I prefer to speak in the official language of my country, even though it's not the language I was brought up speaking. I'd like to begin by thanking the Permanent Forum for helping us with our development projects in our countries. Thank you for organizing this parallel event. With regard to SDG 7 and renewable energy, I'd like to recall that the first date we need to think about really is 1992, when 1,500 researchers, and there were 100 Nobel Prize winners amongst them, drew the attention of the world to the absolute need to change course if we were to avoid the negative effects occurring in the environment. And they were the ones that addressed the question, and they established the 4 major causes for the universal problem of climate change or global warming. And amongst the most important of these is the exclusive use of fossil fuel energy, using just that and nothing else. The second thing that they raised was the pressure that we're putting on forestry resources, because probably the forests are the most important carbon sink, and so deforestation is also fueling global warming. So they wanted us to change course, and to change course you don't act on the effects, you have to deal with the causes. Action has to deal with the major causes, which is fossil energy, and we have to replace fossil fuel with renewable energy, which is accessible energy. It's perennial, it doesn't run out. Fossil fuels will run out at some point, and it's also clean and healthy renewable energy. And one of the ways that we can stem climate change today is to promote renewable energy. And the state of Senegal is very much involved in this policy, despite the disadvantages that it could bring to our country, because we do produce oil. But despite that, we have established an ambitious policy to promote renewable energy. And in the long term, we want to have 30% of our energy resources coming from renewable sources. That's what Senegal is promoting. So despite this alarm bell that was rung in 1992, 25 years after that, another alarm bell was rung in 2017, because they realized that the first message maybe had been heard but hadn't been implemented, because the causes of global warming basically had stayed the same. Using too much fossil fuel, deforestation has gotten worse, and even our food consumption habits have not really changed, and they're fueling climate change, namely eating too much meat. So as far as Senegal is concerned, we have established a very ambitious policy, energy policy. We've strengthened our laws to protect our forests. We've strengthened our laws to protect the environment, and all of this is to address the painful issue of climate change. And I think that this is a very important message to stress the causes of climate change, the way in which they have to be addressed, and the experience of Senegal in doing this. And all of this requires a high level of leadership, which our President has provided. We've realized that we can't ignore what's at stake with climate change, because in the long term it's a very dangerous thing. So that's what I wanted to say about SDG7. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, because you know, we do tend to speak at length sometimes, Africans. We listen for our echo from our speech, says the speaker.
I have two. I just want to say thank you very much, and also that there'll be a series of meetings in the middle of November in Senegal, where the Regional Centre for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, which is supported by UNIDO in Austria and SEforALL and others, and SEforALL will be bringing a whole series of regional meetings to really advance some of the work. But I have just two people who wanted to make very quick comments. I think Neil Briscoe is the head of global partnerships for DFID, and then after Neil, I'd like to pass the floor to Moya Connolly, who's from Deutsche Asset Manager, the senior vice president's there, and I think it's important to hear those perspectives. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the speakers for an extremely powerful panel. There's really very little to say. I think each speaker in turn have shed a fresh light on some of the challenges, on the linkages between SEforALL or SDG7 and leaving no one behind. I'm just curious in terms of where governments have led the way, in terms of, for example, the example of Togo, where you're very steadily increasing the percentage of the country that has access. To what extent are you conscious of leaving no one behind? Is it an assumption that everybody rises with it, or are you working with in your designs to make sure that excluded groups are taken up as you roll out electricity? Thank you.
Merci pour.
Thank you for that question. For further clarification, you want to know to what extent the new electrification strategy in Togo, which is structured in such a way that it should lead us progressively to providing universal access to all of our compatriots by 2030. Our strategy takes account of urban areas as well as rural areas. But to date, the rate of electrification in the rural area is much lower when compared to urban areas. And now we want to respond quickly and appropriately so that, as we said, this year, 2018, from 2018 to 2020, which we've called the commitment phase, we hope that at this stage we can focus our efforts much more on the rural areas. Today, with the traditional grids, there are a number of areas, particularly rural areas, which are not close to the traditional grids. And that is why we are focusing a great deal more on renewable energies, the small power plants based on renewable energy, so that these will be located much closer to the rural areas. And at the same time, we'll be offering kits. This is the second time I've just about said school kits. Let me tell you why I say school kits instead of solar kits. It's quite simply because the rural areas which did not have access to electricity and today which do have electricity, the school rate has increased, school attendance rate in these areas has increased. So you can see the impact of access to electricity on rural areas and on school attendance. And that is why, instead of saying solar kits, I keep saying school kits, because they go hand in hand. At the minute you have access to solar energy, then this encourages school attendance. That's the level of impact it has. So let me just answer your question clearly by saying we have three phases. We have the commitment phase, which goes from 2018 to 2020, and then the acceleration phase from 2021 to 2025 to bring the rate of electrification to 75%. That's during the acceleration phase. And then finally, we will have the consolidation phase from 2026 to 2030. And we hope that we will be able to provide access to energy to all of our people, whether they are living in rural or urban regions. So that is more or less the strategy we have in mind. We're going to focus first and foremost on our own resources as we implement this strategy, but it's obvious that on our own we will not be able to do everything, and that is why we have been working on the public-private partnerships. And we are giving priority to the private sector. And at the same time, I would appeal to development partners here to join us as we implement this program for the well-being of the entire international community. I hope I've answered your question. I'm ready to answer any others.
So thank you very much, sir. So I hand the floor to Moya Connolly, who inhabits the world of finance in a slightly different perspective, and then we're honoured to be joined by His Excellency Tommy Remengasa, who's the President of Palau, and I'll allow him the final word. So Moya.
Thank you. My name is Moya Conley. I'm from DWS, the Asset Management Group of Deutsche Bank. Through our Sustainable Investments Group, we have funds that invest in energy access. We are firm supporters of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, and we see this as an investment proposition. As an investor, we seek bankable assets In order to encourage that, enabling environments are extremely important, a precondition even. We can talk about the specific regulations that are needed, how investors can be encouraged to invest capital, et cetera. But I think those were well covered earlier, especially by Ajita in her remarks. While these are important, but speaking from an investor perspective, I wanted to instead also mention 3 characteristics that we and others look for: transparency, longevity, and consistency. Transparency includes understandable national goals and regulations, availability of data, ability to import products. Longevity is the knowledge that we and others who invest in a market, and most companies are money losing in their first years, that we will be able to make some profit over the long term. Consistency is working on a level playing field, both in a regulatory sense, but also vis-a-vis competition. Energy poverty disproportionately affects women. Creating positive investment environments leverages the work that is already being done to reach our goals of achieving sustainable energy for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think in this dance between the public and private sector, understanding the impact that transparency, longevity, and consistency in rulemaking can have on the ability to open up domestic investment as well as international investment, I think is really important. With that, the final word goes to Your Excellency, the President of Palau. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, friends, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm just happy to be here to really learn and network with all of you here and recognize the work of the sustainable energy that everyone is doing. For those of us in the Pacific Islands, we have no other choice but to pursue clean energy, because that is really our livelihood. Everything that we are all affected with by climate change requires and would ask of us that we pursue renewable energy. Hence, I totally agree that being here and pursuing many of these lofty goals, like the 45% target date that Palau has set for itself to be renewable energy by 2025, will not be accomplished unless there is a public-private partnership or support from the private sector. This is especially true for small island developing states like Palau. Sadly, we have sunlight 365 days of the year, and yet renewable energy is about 1% of what we generate in power. So this is something that if we can just address 45%, we would be saving enormous amount of needed funds for our governments to concentrate on health, education, and other priorities for our nation. We talk about poverty reduction, but renewable energy in the Pacific Islands can go a long way to alleviate the high cost of living, not only for the government, but for the people, the businesses, and the livelihoods of our people. So that is really the message that I think we all share today. And again, I ask of the partners, the traditional partners, including the United Nations, that we go hand in hand on this, that we have gone past the stage of talking and talking and talking. I think what we really need right now is to walk hand in hand with the necessary partnership to get things done on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As the SRSG, it's my sort of real privilege that I get to work with groups at the smallest of scale doing the most innovative things in the most unlikely of places, all the way to multinational companies, to governments of every ilk in pursuit of SDG7. And I think that what we've found is if you put energy efficiency first and get rid of the waste that you don't need in your system, focus on closing the access gap affordably next, and then allow renewable energy to be the revolution that can really transform our economies, then there is much more that we can do more quickly and more cheaply than perhaps we've ever really thought about. And so if we keep that mantra in mind, and if we keep at the forefront of our imaginations the furthest, and we put them first, we believe that together we can go faster, further. Thank you very much.